The single biggest challenge for newer guitar players, and the thing that takes most people out of the game and makes them quit playing altogether, is changing between chords smoothly. There's a lot that goes on. You have to think about your strumming, individual chord shapes, moving to the next chord, where you are in the song and the progression that you're playing. A lot of stuff to think about. I hope you've been practicing your A, D, and E major chords that we learned in one of the previous Guitar Foundations lessons, because we're going to start switching between those chords smoothly. And this is, again, the biggest challenge, and I don't want you to get frustrated here. So I've put together a list for you to read through. It's called the Smooth Chord Transition Checklist. And it just gives you some foundational things that you really need to be aware of and that will really help you not get frustrated when you actually start changing between chords. Before we get into this lesson, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It really helps to get the word out about this course. And if you need to, head over to natesavage.com to pick up a copy of the Guitar Foundations book or book a private lesson with me. That's always available for you too. Let's get into this list. All right, the Smooth Chord Transition Checklist. Number one is know the individual chord shapes first. If you can't go right to your A chord on its own first, then you're gonna have a really hard time switching between A and a D chord. That's just the way it is. So make sure you know the individual chord shapes first. And when you do this, you're also dividing up the challenge. So instead of working on your strumming and your chord transitions at the same time, you're just focusing on one area. That makes it a little bit easier to focus on that. Tip number two, only work on 2 chords at a time when you're starting out. So if you have this progression that you're going through, or a song, like the chorus of a song that has 5 chords in it, don't try to go through all 5 chords at the same time. That's just gonna compound the challenge and make it a lot harder. Say if the first 2 chords of this 5 chord progression were A and D, just isolate that. Just work on those 2 chords, switching between those. And once you're feeling good with that, you can add in the next chord, whether it's, so it might be A, D, and E, right? So only work on A and D at first, and then only work on D and E. Really isolate that. And then you can put all 3 together once you're feeling comfortable. Number 3, practice awareness. Always try to be aware of what chord is coming up next so you don't get taken by surprise. And a really big part of this is to memorize the chord progression you're going to be playing really well before you even try to play it. That way you know exactly what chord is coming next. Also, if you're thinking about, what am I eating for dinner as you're playing, or something else, if your mind isn't focused and aware of what's going on and really engaged, it's gonna be really easy to be taken by surprise, be like, oh crap, I gotta change to the next chord. Always be thinking ahead about the next chord that's coming up. So if you're playing an A and a D is coming next, be thinking about that D before it gets there, and you'll have a lot better chance of hitting that chord transition smoothly. Number 4, visualize what the next chord looks like. So if you're on an A chord and you're just hanging out there for a while strumming, before you have to actually make that transition to whatever the next chord is, in this case we'll use a D, think about what that D looks like before, and this is a great way to practice awareness. Think about what it looks like before you need to make the switch, and then when it gets there, you have a better chance of hitting it. So I'm thinking about that D, then move into it. And along those same lines, number 5 is think about how the next chord feels. So you can think about how the next chord looks, but also think about how it feels. So if you're on the A, think about how that next chord looks, that D looks and feels. So it's just another way to kind of tackle remembering what the next chord looks like, so you're not taken by surprise and so you're aware and you can go right to it. Number 6, D to A, then A to D. And you may be thinking, what in the world does that mean? Well, if you have isolated things down to just 2 chords that you're working on to get the transition really smooth with those, start off going one direction. So from like a D to an A, and then start over. D, think about the A, think about the way it looks and feels, and then make the switch. Then kind of start over, D to A. But also, once you're feeling comfortable with that, flip it around. Start with the A, think about how the D looks and feels, and then make the switch. Then start over. Because it may sound like it's the same thing, but it's really not. Starting on one chord and switching to a chord, it feels really different than starting on the other chord and then switching. So that's a way to kind of cross-train, just to make sure your body knows exactly what's coming next and that you have control over your fingers. Number 7, and this is the last one, it's practice often. If you can, make sure you're practicing 6 days a week, for at least 20 or 30 minutes. More is better. That's a good place to start. Also, when you're doing stuff like this where you have really mechanical things that you're trying to get down, it's really good to practice multiple times a day if you can. So if you have to switch or break that practice session up, instead of one 30-minute session, try maybe 2 15-minute sessions or 3 10-minute sessions. Do more if you can, but the more times a day you can pick up the guitar and work on those mechanical things like changing chords and chord transitions, the easier it's going to be for you and the faster it's going to come for you. All right, enough jibber jabbering. Let's get into this. So the first exercise is just going to be switching between a D and an A chord. And we're going to start off with whole notes and then move to quarter notes and then move to eighth notes too. So we have 6 different exercises to help iron out this transition for a D and an A chord. All right, this first one is just a D major for one whole measure, a whole note. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I've thrown in a measure of rest for you. That little rectangle in the next measure is just telling you to lay out for one measure or 4 beats, and that'll give you time to make the transition to the A. So you're gonna have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then a whole note on A. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then you have another whole rest, which gives you time to switch back and forth to the D. I thought it was really important to put this in here to kind of break you in to making smooth chord transitions. And I have one more tip to help make your chord transitions as smooth as possible. And this doesn't always work, but I kind of designed this as, you know, a training course to start working on getting chords as smooth as possible. But the tip is to look for common fingerings between chord shapes if you can. So in this case, we're moving from a D to an A. And if you use this fingering for an A, then it makes it real easy to switch between the D because my index finger doesn't move. All I do is have my D chord on there, and then I move my index finger back a little bit, but it stays on that second fret of the G, and then these 2 fingers come and just get in for the rest of that A chord. And when I move back to the D, my index finger stays on the same fret, and the rest of my D just falls into place. So it's kind of an anchor point for this chord transition. So take this pretty slowly at first with no metronome, and go back and read through the Smooth Chord Transition Checklist however many times you need to until you're starting to remember all the tips we had there. So any tempo you want, just count out loud. 1, 2, 3, 4. Measure of rest. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Rest. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Rest. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then rest again. Okay, and you're gonna notice immediately whether you need to go back and work on these individual chord shapes or not, because if you're playing a D and you have to kind of put one finger down at a time for the A, or if you're on the A and you have to kind of put one finger down at a time for the D, that's telling you that you don't know the chord shape well enough on its own to make the transition really smoothly. All right, if you're feeling up for it, put on a metronome at 60 or 70 beats per minute and just work on making that transition. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Measure of rest. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Rest. Back to a D. 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Rest. 2, 3, 4. 1. Always be thinking about what that next chord looks like and feels like. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. So think about that A. What does it look like? What does it feel like? Make the transition. 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, level 2 for the whole note version of this exercise is to just pull the rests out. So you have 2 measures of D, but you're gonna have 2 whole notes in each of those measures. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Another 1, 2, 3, 4. Then hold out as long as you can, then make the transition to the A. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. Same thing. 3, 4. D. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. Hold out as long as you can. 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And this is where the rubber kind of meets the road, because you have to hold that first chord out as long as you can, so there it's kind of a seamless transition or a smooth transition into the next chord. Once you feel comfortable with that, 70 or 60 beats per minute, and we'll just go through that. 1, 2, 3, 4. D. 2, 3, 4. Again. 1, 2, 3, 4. And back to an A. Think about it, the way it feels. Think about that D that's coming up. 3, 4. Switch. 1, 2, 3, 4. Another measure of D. Think about that A. 3, 4. Make the switch. 1, 2, 3, 4. 3, 4. Okay, if you need to stop the video there and just work at that level with whole notes, that's completely fine and normal. We're gonna go ahead and move on to quarter notes. So we're gonna use all downstrokes using quarter notes, throw the rest back in measures 2 and 4 and see what that sounds like. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, rest, make the switch, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, make the switch back to D, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, back to A, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, let's try that with the metronome. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Rest, make the switch. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Rest, 2, switch. 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Rest, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Rest. Okay, so nothing earth-shattering there, but this is where things start to change because we're taking the rest out and putting 2 measures of quarter notes for each chord, and that gives you a very small amount of time to make the transition. So you're gonna have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, then to the A, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and one tip that I want to give you here, one little tool as a kind of stepping stone, is to do an open string strum on beat 4 before the chord transition occurs. So if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, take your fingers off, strum the strings open on 4, and then put the chord on 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, open strum, then the A, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And this isn't ideal, but it is a stepping stone. Eventually you're gonna wanna shoot for not having any open string blips in there. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Just like that, as smooth as possible. But it is a good device that's pretty common on guitar that will help you kind of get to that next level of switching between chords smoothly. Let's do that with a metronome. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Another measure of D. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Back to D. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. A. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. If you need to stop the video here and just work on that, that's completely understandable. That's a big jump from whole notes to quarter notes, but we're gonna keep moving on, and I know you know what's coming up next. We're gonna do 8th notes with a measure of rest between each measure of chord. So we're gonna have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and down and up, alternating with your strumming hand, and then a measure of rest, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and then while you're transitioning to A, and then a measure of A, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and then another measure of rest to start the entire thing over. So 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, with a metronome, 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 3, 4. Measure of rest, 2, 3, 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Back to D, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 1, 2. Switch to an A, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. It is D-Day, it's time to do it. Take the rest out of measures 2 and 4, all 8th notes. And if you have to put an open string blip here at the end on and of 4 of the second measure of the D chord and the A chord, that's totally fine. Use that as a stepping stone and just work on refining your smooth transition here. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Because that gives you about an 8th note's worth of time to make the switch and 1. So if you don't do that little open blip, you're gonna have less than 8th note because you have to hit that last 8th note and 1. You have just a fraction of a second to go from here to there. So that's pretty tough. So the little open string thing can be a good little stepping stone to get to this level. So let's go as slow as you need to at first with no metronome. 1 and 2 and 3, 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. That's with a blip. 3, 4, 1. And here's with no blip. 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. No blip. So just 2 measures of each chord. 3 8th notes and alternating down and up strumming. Here it is with the metronome. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. And one thing I should mention here throughout all of these exercises, these 6 exercises we went through, be very aware of your strumming. Aim for the D, only hit the top 4 strings. Mute that low E string if you need to with your thumb. Get some kind of tactile reference up here to help you hit the right strings, and look back to make sure you're hitting just the top 4 strings of the D. And for the A, just leave out the low E. And again, look back, set up a mirror or a video camera if you need to, or your phone, to get that aim really good for both chords. It may seem like we covered like just a mountain of material in this lesson, and we did, because this is one of the toughest things for newer guitar players to do, and it does require a lot of work. It's not gonna be like in a day or two that you get this. It may take some of you a week, it may take some of you a couple of months, and that's okay. The important thing is that you work toward it, because you can do it if you put in the time. But this is one of the foundational skills that every guitar player has to go through and build up over time. Here are your assignments for this lesson. Number 1, make sure you know the open A and D chords on their own very well, and you can go right to them first before even trying to switch between these chords. Number 2, read through the Smooth Chord Transition Checklist several times to make sure you have all those tips down. Assignments 3 through 8 are just to practice or play through each of the 6 exercises we covered in this lesson, and make sure to take this just one chunk at a time. Only work on the first 2 at first, the ones that use whole notes, and once you're feeling comfortable with that, move on to the ones that use quarter notes. And finally, when you're finished with that, the ultimate goal of the one with 8th notes will be your last goal for this lesson. If you have any questions about anything we've covered here, I know that this can be a pretty critical point in a guitar player's career. So leave a comment below if you have a question. I'll get back to you there, or you can email me, nate@natesavage.com. Now, if you're having really serious trouble with any of these individual areas, you can always go to natesavage.com and schedule a private lesson with me. The first one is complimentary, so there's no risk. Remember to work hard on this, be very consistent with your practice multiple times a day if you can, and it will come. It may not come as quick as you want, but it will come if you put in the time. I'll see you in the next video.